As a result of the Six-Day War, the Golan Heights, the western bank of the Jordan River, as well as the Sinai Peninsula remained under the control of the Israeli army. This situation, of course, did not suit the Arab countries. Most dissatisfied was Egypt, which lost vast territories, and also lost sole control over the Suez Canal. That is why on July 1, 1967, the so-called War of Attrition began. During this war, Egypt tried to regain control of the Sinai Peninsula, but did not conduct large-scale hostilities. The war was a mutual artillery shelling, during which the Egyptian army tried to destroy the positions of the Israeli army in the Sinai Peninsula. As expected, the war in the form of mutual shelling did not bring Egypt the desired results, and on August 7, 1970, a truce was concluded, after which a short period of calm began. Some time later, Egyptian President Nasser dies, and his successor Anwar Sadat, knowing full well that without large-scale military action it would not be possible to regain control over the Sinai Peninsula, began preparing for war with the support of Iraq, Jordan and Syria. The Soviet Union also took part in the preparation of the Arab armies. The Arab coalition planned to increase its chances of success by launching a surprise attack during the Jewish holiday of Yom Kippur. By the beginning of the war, the Arab states had a rather impressive army of up to 993,000 people, which had 3,630 tanks and 480 aircraft at its disposal. As for the Israeli army, it consisted of 375,000 soldiers who had 1,700 tanks and 450 aircraft at their disposal. During the war, through mobilization, the size of the Israeli army increased to 415,000 soldiers. The fighting began on October 6, 1973. At 2 p.m., Egyptian planes took to the air, and Egyptian artillery began to fire under the minefields and wire fences of the Israeli army. The actions of the Egyptian aviation were quite successful. They managed to disable 3 Israeli airfields and damage the air defense system. 5 minutes after the start of the attack, the Egyptian troops began crossing the Suez Canal. Closer to 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the landing of the first wave of Egyptian infantry was completed. At this time, Israeli tanks advanced towards them, but time was lost because part of the Israeli positions was already occupied by the Egyptians. Pushing the Israeli troops back from the Suez Canal, the Egyptians began building crossings to speed up the transfer of fresh forces. By nightfall, the Egyptian army managed to capture a bridgehead 8 kilometers long and 4 kilometers wide, and transport up to 780 tanks. To eliminate the enemy's bridgehead, the Israeli army deployed its armored divisions. Unfortunately, for the Israeli army, the tactics that proved to be excellent during the Six-Day War did not work this time. Israeli tank brigades, which went on the attack without infantry support, ran into enemy infantry equipped with Soviet hand-held anti-tank weapons. Having failed to break through the line of defense of the Egyptians, Israeli tanks, having suffered losses, were forced to retreat. According to available data, more than half of the Israeli tanks involved in the attack were damaged or destroyed. By the evening of October 7, the Egyptians managed to transport up to 90,000 soldiers and about 850 tanks to the Sinai Peninsula. The Israeli army also received reinforcements, thanks to which it managed to concentrate about 480 tanks on the line of contact. On October 8, the Israeli army received orders to attack the Egyptians, who had taken up positions in the Kizian area. Since the Egyptians managed to take advantageous positions, and also had at their disposal a huge amount of hand-held anti-tank weapons, the attack of the Israeli armored divisions was unsuccessful. Having suffered serious losses, but at the same time failing to break through the enemy defenses, they were forced to retreat. At noon, the Israeli army tried again to attack, but this time the attack was unsuccessful. Encouraged by their success, the Egyptian army launched an attack that began in the late afternoon. Having gathered the forces of the Israeli army, they managed to repel the attack of the Egyptians, who retreated to their original positions. After that, a temporary lull formed at the front. The fact is that despite the requirement of the Egyptian Minister of War to launch a large-scale offensive deep into the Sinai Peninsula, the Egyptian Army Chief of Staff ordered his people to remain under the cover of anti-aircraft systems, fearing an attack by Israeli aircraft. While the Egyptian Minister of War and the Chief of the General Staff were arguing about how to proceed, and the Egyptian troops were waiting for the order, the Israeli command did not waste time in vain, but brought up additional forces. By October 13, both sides had prepared their own battle plans. The Egyptian army planned to launch an offensive in the northern and southern parts of the peninsula in order to encircle the enemy army. In turn, the Israeli command planned to hold back the onslaught of the enemy and inflict maximum damage on him with the help of aviation, after which they launched a counteroffensive and crossed the Suez Canal to force the Egyptians to stop hostilities. On the morning of October 14, the Egyptian army launched an offensive simultaneously in 6 directions. In the north, the Egyptian Armored Brigade, supported by an infantry division, advanced towards the city of Ramani. To support the offensive, Egyptian helicopters landed troops. In the south, Egyptian troops launched an offensive towards the Mitla and Jidi passes. Egyptian troops also launched an offensive in the central sector. Very soon, the Egyptian detachments advancing in the north were able to break through the defensive positions of the Israeli army, knocking out Sassoon's division from their positions. The Egyptians could not develop success in this direction, since very soon they were counterattacked by the Adon division, which was able to push the Egyptian troops back. In the central sector, the Israeli army was not only able to repulse the attack of the Egyptians, but counterattack them by pushing back the Egyptian troops. In the south, the advancing Egyptian troops also failed to break through the enemy defenses. The Egyptians tried to regroup to launch a new attack, but at that moment their tanks, which managed to get out of the zone of control of their air defense, were attacked by Israeli aircraft. As a result of the air raid, Egyptian troops lost up to 60 tanks, making it impossible to continue the offensive. After stopping the advance of the Egyptians, the Israeli army launched a counteroffensive with the aim of crossing the Suez Canal and cutting off the supply of Egyptian troops in the Sinai Peninsula. Having found a weak point in the defense of the Egyptians, the Israeli army on October 15 attacked their positions near the city of Ismailia. The largest tank battle of the war broke out in this place. In the end, the Israeli army managed to break through the enemy defenses and reach the shore of the Suez Canal. On the night of October 17, Israeli detachments managed to build a pontoon bridge and begin the transfer of infantry and equipment. In return, the Egyptian troops attempted to put the Israeli army across the canal, but all Egyptian attacks were repulsed. Having thrown about 140 tanks across the canal, the Israeli army began to expand the bridgehead, trying to cut off the Egyptian army in the Sinai Peninsula from supplies. To solve this problem, it was necessary to establish control over the cities of Ismailia and Suez. The assault on the city of Suez, which was of great strategic importance, began on October 24. A bloody battle broke out, during which both sides suffered serious losses. In the end, failing to occupy Suez, the Israeli troops withdrew from the city. There was a stalemate at the front. On the one hand, the Egyptian army could not dislodge the Israeli troops from the bridgehead they occupied. On the other hand, the Israeli army also could not cut the supply line of the Egyptian troops stationed in the Sinai Peninsula. Simultaneously with the confrontation in the Sinai Peninsula, hostilities also began in the Golan Heights. On October 6, the Syrian army attacked Israeli positions in the Golan Heights. The Syrian attack began with a powerful artillery barrage. At the same time, Syrian helicopters land troops in the rear of the Israeli defense line. After the completion of the artillery preparation, the Syrian detachments launched a large-scale attack. Very soon, the Syrians managed to break through the enemy's defenses, but for unknown reasons, they did not attack the city of Naffa, where the command of the Israeli troops and an important crossroads were located, but began to move in a different direction. In turn, the Israeli army took up defensive positions in the hills between Quneitra and the Valley of Tears. In the southern part of the Golan Heights, the situation of the Israeli army was more difficult. The Syrians not only managed to break through the defenses of the Israeli army, but also deprived the Israeli troops of coordination. The Israeli army managed to stabilize the situation on the Golan Heights only after the reservists entered the battle, who were able to stop the advance of the Syrian army by October 8. Taking advantage of the arrival of fresh detachments, the Israeli army launched a counteroffensive, and starting from October 9, Israeli aircraft began to strike at strategic targets in Syria, as well as at attacking Syrian troops. By October 10, the Israeli army managed to oust the Syrian troops from the occupied territories, after which the Israeli troops began to move deep into Syria. Some time later, Israeli tanks were able to push through the enemy's defenses and approach at a distance of less than 40 kilometers from the Syrian capital. The Israeli army tried to build on the success, but faced an unpleasant surprise in the form of Iraqi troops who arrived in Syria shortly before the war, attacked Israeli troops and stopped their advance. After the Iraqi and Jordanian detachments entered the battle, the Israeli army was unable to continue moving deep into Syria, but at the same time it was able to take up defense in the occupied territories and repelled all enemy attacks. As early as October 22, a resolution of the UN Security Council, agreed upon earlier by representatives of the United States and the USSR, was adopted, which provided for an immediate ceasefire and a stop of the parties in their positions previously occupied. Since Israel continued hostilities after the adoption of this resolution, the leadership of the USSR warned the Israeli government on October 24 about the consequences of failure to comply with the resolution. Since the United States also demanded an early cessation of hostilities, on October 25, the Israeli army ceased active hostilities. On January 18, 1974, an agreement was signed between Egypt and Israel on the disengagement of troops. Under this agreement, Israel withdrew its troops 32 kilometers from the Suez Canal. On May 31, a similar agreement was signed by Israel and Syria. According to this agreement, part of the Golan Heights was returned to Syria, subject to their demilitarization and placement on the line of contact of UN observers. If you like this video, be sure to subscribe to my channel and click on the bell so as not to miss new videos.